So the first thing I'm going to do, I've already prepared my fabric front and back pieces, and I've marked the centre point on both of those and also on my flap front. And then I've pinned the wadding to the back of this one, and I'm just going to do the same to the other piece, and also the back of my flap. Then I'm going to choose one of these to be the front, and I'm going to use the paper pattern piece and mark the position of the press stud. So I'll do that by measuring from the centre mark down, which is 4 centimetres, to the centre of the marking, and across 10 centimetres. So I just transfer those measurements onto the fabric. There's the 10. Up slightly for the 4, and that is going to be the position of the press stud. I'm going to do the same on the front inside of the flap and stitch the appropriate part of the press stud on there so that they're ready before we start putting everything together. So I'm just finishing off the second part of the press stud, which is going on the lining of the flap of the sunglasses case. Just need to go around and make sure it's very secure. And we're stitching through the fabric and through the wadding at the back. Just do a couple of stitches to fasten that off. Okay, so then we have a press stud on the inside of the lining and on the front of the case. And that will eventually clip in place there. So what I'm going to do now is continue making the flap, and we already have the lining part of the flap here. So what I need to do is find the front of the flap, and I'm going to put them right sides together, pin that in place, and then stitch all the way around the curved edge with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Leave this top edge open because that's where you're going to turn it through and attach it to the rest of the case. So I'm just going to put a couple of pins in there. And then that's ready now to go to the sewing machine, stitch all the way around this section here. Okay, now that that's nicely pressed, you need to turn under 1 centimetre along this open edge on the exterior and on the lining. So I'm just going to clip these in place really quickly just to show you. And when you get to the other side, you can actually use the same clips to clip those 2 edges together. When you're happy with that and you've got a nice straight edge with the 1 centimetre turning, give that a nice press. And we're not stitching it at this stage because we're going to stitch it directly onto the back of the sunglasses case. Okay, so now the flap has now been top stitched around the curved edge. This top edge is still open, and we're going to attach that now to the back piece of the sunglasses case. So the back piece is the piece without the other half of the press stud. So I'm going to place this in the centre of this flap. So I have my centre marking here on the top edge, and I have marked the centre of the flap with a pin. The press stud is going to be facing down, and I'm going to line up the pin with my centre marking, and then I have made some other marks here which are 3 centimetres down from the top edge, and this line is where the edge of the flap is going to sit. So I'm just going to place those in the right place now, and then just transfer the pin. Make sure those markings are in line with the edge of the flap. Like so. Okay, so that is now pinned to the back of the sunglasses case, and you can see on the other side the press stud is facing underneath. So I'm now going to stitch along here, about 2 to 3 millimeters from the edge of that line. I'm going to keep my needle in the fabric. I'm going to turn and stitch for about 1/2 centimetre. Needle in the fabric again, turn, stitch all the way along, parallel to the row of stitching you've just made. Pivot it again and finish off here with 1/2 centimetre. So you'll end up with a long, skinny rectangle of stitching. Okay, so now the flap is attached to the back of the sunglasses case, and you can see the top stitching there in a contrast colour. So the next stage is to put the front and the back of the case together. Before I do that, I'm just going to fold the flap that we've just attached down and out of the way so it doesn't inadvertently get caught in with the stitching. And then I'm going to place the front and the back right sides together, matching up all of the raw edges, and just clipping along the top edge to keep that in place whilst I then pin around the outside. That's pinned, I'm going to stitch all the way around with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, again leaving the top open. Okay, so the front and the back are now stitched together, and I'm going to just trim out the little area around the curved. It's really tempting to not bother to do this, but it does make quite a bit of difference to the finished item and how it looks. Okay, I'm going to trim down the seam allowances just so that there's not bulkiness in the side seams. And then I'm going to turn this out the right way, push those curves out so the seam is nice and straight, give it a bit of a press, unclip the flap now, and you can see it starting to take shape. Now that's a bit tight at the moment because we still have the seam allowance on here, and that's going to be folded over shortly. So I'm just going to put that to one side now whilst we make the lining. So I've got my 2 pieces of lining here, and I'm just going to pin those right sides together and then stitch around as we did for the exterior front and back of the glasses case. The only difference here is that you'll be stitching from the top down around the curve and stopping, and you'll be leaving a gap in the centre here at the bottom of about 5 centimetres. That's so you can turn the case through once you've attached the lining to the exterior. So stitch down and stop, and then down and stop. Okay, so the lining piece is now stitched together. I've clipped the corners and I've trimmed the seam allowance as we did before, but I've not trimmed it along the bottom here. This part is where it's open, where you've left that gap, so leave that at the full seam allowance. Then you're going to fold the flap back of your of your sunglasses case, and you're going to put that inside the lining. So the lining is wrong side out and the sunglasses case is right side out. And just adjust that till it fits nicely. Match up the side seams, clip those in place. I think it always helps if you match those up first, then you know that you've got the most important parts in exactly the right spot. And then just go along the rest of it, keeping the wadding in the layers as well. Don't let that sink down, otherwise you'll end up with a lump. Actually, I'm going to pin this, I think it's a little bit easier. Just makes it a little bit more manageable under the sewing machine. And then repeat with the other side, make sure that flap is pushed nice and as far down as it will possibly go. Okay, and then you're going to stitch all the way around this top edge at the 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now you've got to put this under your machine in quite a tricky way, so I quite often will turn this inside out. I find it works better having the wadding on the underneath, but it's entirely up to you and see how your machine works best. But just stitch all the way around the top. Okay, so I've now stitched around the top edge of the sunglasses case, and I'm now going to turn it through the hole that was left at the bottom of the lining. So just carefully pull everything through. Push out the sides as you did before, and then fold under the edges that you left open at the bottom of the lining, and just give those a quick finger press and then pin them in place so that they can be stitched. Okay, then you need to just stitch along the bottom here to close that opening. Okay, so I've top stitched around the edge of the sunglasses case. So all that is left to do is pop the sunglasses in and do up the press stud. And there we are.